They said she donated $800 in my name to the exact place I swore I'd never step into again, the hospice where my father died, begging me to forgive him. And when I found the receipt on her desk, folded like a prayer, I realized she hadn't betrayed me. She was trying to return me to the one place my heart refused to go. I stood in her study for nearly an hour, staring at that piece of paper. The ink had bled slightly, as if her hand had trembled while signing my name, John Miller. It was my name, my signature, my guilt. And yet it wasn't me who had given that money away. It was Emma, my wife. For years that hospice had been my private hell. The smell of disinfectant, the sound of machines keeping people half alive, the room where my father whispered my name as if it were both a plea and a curse. I'd promised myself I'd never go back there, never forgive him for what he did, never let the past buy its way into peace. And now she dragged it all back with a donation slip. I tried to convince myself it was a mistake. Maybe she'd meant another foundation. Maybe it was just coincidence. But Emma doesn't make mistakes like that. She's the kind of woman who reads the fine print twice, who arranges flowers in perfect symmetry, even when no one will see them. If she chose that place, she knew exactly what it meant. When she came home that evening, her face was calm. Too calm. I waited until she hung up her coat before speaking. "Emma," I said quietly, "what did you do with the money?" She froze for a moment. Then she turned slowly, eyes meeting mine. No fear, no apology, just exhaustion. "I gave it back," she said. "Back? To who?" "To the man you refused to forgive." Her words hit me harder than any confession could. I wanted to shout to tell her she had no right to touch that wound, to use my father's memory like some twisted charity. But I couldn't find anger, only confusion. She walked past me and sat down on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, like she'd been preparing for this conversation all day. "I found the letters," she said. "All the ones he wrote before he died, the ones you never opened." I looked at her silent. I hadn't known she'd seen them. Those envelopes had been hidden in a drawer, sealed in dust, sealed in pride. I read every word, she continued softly. And I realized he wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was begging for your peace. I sank into the chair opposite her. "You had no right," I whispered. "Maybe not," she said, voice trembling. "But I couldn't watch you keep punishing yourself for something you didn't cause." She told me how the hospice was struggling, how they were about to shut down, how they needed exactly $300 or $800 to survive another year. He built that place, John, she said. You can hate him all you want, but he built it so others could leave this world with dignity. You think you're honoring him by ignoring it, but you're just letting his last good deed die. Her words burned not because they were cruel, but because they were true. I had spent half my life proving I wasn't my father. Every decision I made, every line I refused to cross, was built on defiance. And yet here she was reminding me that his shadow still defined my every step. The silence between us grew heavy. The fireplace hummed softly, the only sound in the room. Emma's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She never cries when I expect her to. Only later, when no one's watching. I didn't want your money, she said finally. I wanted your release. I didn't answer. I just stared at the flames, trying to remember what his voice sounded like that last night. I'd been standing by the door of his room, too proud to walk closer. He'd reached out a trembling hand, tubes trailing from his wrist, and said, "Son, don't inherit my silence." I had walked away before he could finish, and now, decades later, my wife had paid for the sentence I never served, not in court, but in conscience. When I went to bed that night, I found a small envelope on my pillow. Inside it was a photograph of the hospice courtyard, golden light spilling through old trees. On the back, in Emma's handwriting, were 5 words, "Go back before it's gone." I sat in the dark for a long time, staring at those words. The air felt heavy with memory, as if every breath I took carried the echo of something unfinished. I wanted to tear the photo apart, to throw it away, like I'd thrown away the letters, but my hands wouldn't move. Because deep down I knew she was right. The donation wasn't about money. It was about time, the kind of time I'd stolen from myself by refusing to forgive. When I finally turned off the light, the room was filled with the faint scent of her perfume, warm like the past she was trying to make me face. And for the first time in years, I whispered his name into the dark, not out of anger, not out of regret, but because I could finally feel what she'd been trying to give me all along, the courage to return. The next morning, I drove until the city disappeared behind me. The road to the hospice wound through old hills and dying trees, places I hadn't seen since the funeral. Every mile felt like a conversation I'd avoided. The donation receipt sat folded on the passenger seat, fluttering with each gust of air from the vent, like a quiet reminder that someone else had already crossed the line I'd drawn. The closer I got, the colder my hands felt. It wasn't fear. It was memory. That heavy kind of dread that sits in your chest when the past refuses to stay buried. I'd spent years building a life around silence, convincing myself that moving forward meant never turning back. But Emma, she'd found a way to make me face what I'd built my strength on denial. The hospice appeared just past the bend, a low, white building with faded green trim, half hidden behind a row of willows. It looked smaller than I remembered, almost fragile. I parked at the edge of the lot and stayed inside the car, watching the wind move through the trees. I could see the old brick path leading to the courtyard, the same one my father had walked every morning until his legs gave out. I told myself I'd just take a look, maybe speak to someone and leave. But when I stepped out, the air hit me, that same sterile mix of flowers, antiseptic, and sorrow, the smell of endings. I walked up to the reception desk, my shoes echoing on the tile. A woman in her 60s looked up, smiling politely. "Good morning, sir. Are you here to visit someone?" I hesitated. No, not exactly. "My name's John Miller." Her smile faltered for a second. "Oh," she said softly, as if the name meant something here. "You're Emma's husband." I nodded slowly. "She told us you might come." That sentence landed like a whisper through glass. She told them I might come. That meant she knew I would eventually, even when I swore I wouldn't. The woman led me through the hallway. The walls were lined with photographs, patients, families, nurses. Some faces I recognized, others knew. And then halfway down the corridor, I saw one. I hadn't expected my father standing with the staff, smiling faintly, his hand resting on the shoulder of a nurse. The sight stopped me cold. I remembered the argument we'd had before he came here, the words I'd thrown at him, cruel and final. You don't get to ask for forgiveness just because you're dying. I hadn't spoken to him again after that. Not until the day I watched the light fade from his eyes. I stepped closer to the photograph. His eyes looked different than I remembered, calmer, maybe even peaceful. It made me wonder if he'd forgiven me long before I'd even had the chance to hate him properly. She insisted we keep that photo up, the woman said softly. Said it reminded people that even broken families can heal in small ways. She, I asked, your wife. She's been here a few times over the years, volunteered on weekends, helped with supplies. The world tilted a little. Emma had never told me that. She'd been carrying the weight of my silence for years, quietly mending what I refused to look at. Every excuse I had made, every time I said, "It's my pain, let me keep it," she'd been finding ways to make it less heavy without me knowing. The woman left me alone in the hallway. I walked slowly to my father's old room, number 214. The door was closed, but the plaque still bore his name. Someone had left a small flower vase beneath it. White lilies, the kind Emma always bought. I opened the door. The room smelled like disinfectant and fading memories. The bed was neatly made, sunlight spilling across the floor in golden streaks. It was empty now, but I could still hear the faint rhythm of the monitor that used to keep time with his breathing. I could still feel the anger I'd carried, sitting in the corner, refusing to hold his hand. I sat down on the chair where I'd once sat, elbows on my knees, hands trembling. For years I thought forgiveness meant weakness, that letting go would somehow erase what he'd done. But sitting there in that stillness, I realized something I hadn't before. Holding on to pain doesn't punish the dead. It only imprisons the living. I took the photograph from my pocket, the one Emma left on my pillow, and placed it on the nightstand. "You win," I whispered, not sure if I meant my father or her. Outside, the sound of laughter floated through the window. Children playing in the courtyard. I stood and looked out. They were running in circles around the fountain, splashing water bright against the dullness of the place. One of the nurses stood nearby. Smiling, she watched them. For a brief moment, the hospice didn't feel like a place of endings. It felt like a place where grief took a breath before letting go. I walked outside past the courtyard until I reached the old oak bench near the gate, the one where my father used to sit with a blanket on his knees. I sat down, staring at the cracked pavement. A soft voice broke the silence. "You found it?" I turned. The nurse from the photograph stood behind me, older, now gray in her hair, but the same calm eyes. "He talked about you," she said. "Every day." I looked away. Probably not kindly. She smiled faintly. "No, but honestly." He said, "My son's heart is made of glass, sharp and beautiful and breakable. He knew you'd come back one day." The words pressed against something I'd kept blocked for too long. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, staring at the ground as the wind moved through the trees, carrying that faint scent of lilies and sunlit dust. And for the first time, I didn't fight it. I let myself feel the weight, the grief, the guilt, the love I'd buried under anger. When I finally stood, the nurse touched my arm. "He wanted you to have this," she said, handing me a small envelope, yellowed by time. My name was written on it, the handwriting shaky, but familiar. I knew before I opened it that the past wasn't finished with me yet. The envelope trembled in my hands. My name, John, written in the uneven strokes of a dying man. It looked as if each letter had cost him a breath. I sat back on the old oak bench, the one he'd once called his last piece of sky, and turned the envelope over slowly. The paper had yellowed, and the seal was half torn. Someone must have opened it once. Maybe Emma, maybe a nurse. But the letter inside was still folded perfectly, untouched by time. When I finally opened it, the first line hit me like a whisper from the grave. "If you're reading this, son, it means you walked back into a place you once called hell. Thank you. I froze. My throat tightened, but I kept reading. You think forgiveness is about deserving. It isn't. It's about freeing the one who keeps carrying the sentence. I built this hospice not to erase what I did, but to make sure some pain could mean something. I knew you'd hate me for it. I just prayed that someday someone would love you enough to make you come back. I stopped there for a long moment. The wind brushed through the courtyard, and a dry leaf landed on the paper, as if the world wanted to read with me. The money I left, the inheritance you never used, was never meant to buy peace. It was meant to build a door. You locked it. She opened it. If she's the reason you're here, then you chose well. She carries light the way I carried shame. Don't lose her. My chest ached as I reached the final lines. When I die, don't bring flowers. Bring silence. That's what I owed you all my life. That's what I give you now. By the time I finished reading, my vision had blurred. I folded the paper back carefully, like something sacred. The nurse had quietly stepped away, leaving me alone beneath the late afternoon sun. For a moment, I didn't know whether to hate him more or to thank him for the letter I was never brave enough to open. When it mattered, the world had a cruel sense of timing. Emma must have known about this letter all along. She must have kept it safe, waiting for the right moment to let it find me. I sat there until the light began to fade. The shadows stretched long across the courtyard, and somewhere behind me, I could hear soft singing the evening prayer the staff did for patients who had passed that week. The melody was faint, almost like a heartbeat fading into quiet. I thought about what he wrote. She carries light the way I carried shame. Emma had been doing that for years, carrying my silence, my guilt, my unspoken rage, and turning it into compassion. She'd been building a bridge to a place I swore I'd burn. And she did it without asking for credit, without ever trying to change me with words. She let her sins speak even when I didn't. As I got up to leave, I slipped the letter into my coat pocket. I didn't know what to do with it yet. Maybe I'd keep it. Maybe I'd bury it beside the photo she left. But I knew one thing: I wasn't leaving this place as the same man who arrived. When I walked back inside to thank the nurse, she was arranging flowers at the front desk. He used to sit by the window every morning, she said quietly, not looking up. Said the light there made him believe God still forgives broken things. Did he ever talk about what he wanted for me? I asked. She smiled softly. He said you'd come back, not because of guilt, but because someone finally taught you how to love without fear. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just nodded and turned away, my throat too tight for words. Outside, the sun was slipping behind the hills. I walked to my car slowly, the gravel crunching underfoot. When I reached the door, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Taped to the windshield was a small, folded note. Emma's handwriting again. If you're reading this, it means you went back. That's all I needed. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, like her scarf. Beneath the message, she'd written one last line. Don't come home tonight. Stay. Listen. I looked up at the hospice building, the lights glowing in the windows, like small lanterns of mercy. For a long moment, I hesitated. Then I put the key back in my pocket and walked toward the courtyard again. There was a bench near the fountain, half lit by the setting sun. I sat there, closed my eyes, and listened. The world grew still. Somewhere inside, a bell chimed softly. A nurse whispered a prayer. And in that silence, for the first time, I didn't feel anger when I thought of him. I didn't feel the need to justify my pain or to protect it. All I felt was the quiet weight of understanding. Forgiveness wasn't something I had to give. It was something I had to stop refusing. I leaned back, letting the last light fade across my face, and whispered, I forgive you. The words came out rough, foreign but real. And as the wind passed through the courtyard, carrying the scent of lilies and dust, I swear I could almost hear his voice in it, not saying thank you, not even I'm sorry, just breathing like he'd finally let go too. That night I stayed. I slept on that same bench under the stars, my father's letter pressed against my chest. The world felt painfully quiet, but not empty. For the first time in decades, the silence didn't punish me. It healed. When dawn came, it wasn't the sunrise that woke me. It was the sound of footsteps on gravel. Slow, careful, familiar. I opened my eyes and saw a woman standing by the gate, holding a thermos in one hand and a paper bag in the other. Emma. She was wearing that long beige cardigan she always took on road trips, her hair loose, eyes tired, but soft. I figured you'd stay, she said quietly, walking toward me. I sat up still, holding my father's letter. You knew. I hoped, she said, handing me the thermos. Coffee. Black. No sugar. Like always. I took it, the warmth seeping through my hands. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The courtyard was wrapped in a thin morning mist, golden light cutting through like forgiveness itself had taken form. You read it, didn't you? She asked. I nodded. He wrote it for a man I didn't know how to be. She looked at me for a long moment. Maybe that's the man you are now. Her words settled between us like dust after a storm. I don't understand how you could do it, I said. That much money. You gave away everything we saved. For him. She shook her head. Not for him, John. For you. For us. I looked down, fingers tightening around the letter. You think this fixes anything? No, she said softly. It wasn't meant to fix. It was meant to open. There was something in her eyes, not triumph, not apology, but quiet faith. The kind that stands even when everything else falls apart. She sat beside me close enough that I could feel the faint tremor in her hand as it brushed against mine. I used to watch you, John, she said. Every morning before work, every night when you'd just stare at nothing. You built a house out of silence. And every time I tried to walk in, you shut the door. Her voice cracked a little. I realized the only way to reach you wasn't to knock. It was to find the key you'd thrown away. I turned to her. And you thought this place was that key? I knew it was, she said. Because the part of you that died here, it's the part I fell in love with. The part that still wanted to feel even after everything. The words hit me in a way nothing else had. All the nights I'd watched her sleep beside me, all the mornings I'd left before sunrise. To avoid her gaze, they came rushing back, heavy with the truth I'd ignored. She hadn't been waiting for me to forgive my father. She'd been waiting for me to forgive myself. I wanted to tell her I was sorry, that I understood now. But the words felt too small. So instead I just whispered, "You shouldn't have to save me." She smiled faintly. "Then let me stop saving you and just walk beside you." For a while, we sat there in silence. The world waking around us, the sound of nurses greeting each other, the soft rustle of leaves. Then, without looking at me, she said, "He left something else for you." I frowned. "Who, your father?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden box, old and scuffed. They found it in storage. The nurse gave it to me years ago. My breath caught. "Why didn't you show me?" "You weren't ready." I opened the box slowly. Inside was a silver watch, my grandfather's, and beneath it, a small cassette tape labeled in fading ink for John when he returns. The air around me seemed to stop. I ran my thumb over the label, the handwriting painfully familiar. "You kept this all these years?" Emma nodded. "I didn't even have the heart to play it. I thought, it should be you." I stared at the tape, the past condensed into a fragile strip of plastic and sound. "There's an old player inside," she said quietly. "Room 214. For a moment, I couldn't move. My body felt caught between two worlds. The man who'd left this place in anger, and the one standing here now, haunted by a love that refused to give up. "Come with me," she said. We walked together down the hallway. The staff greeted Emma by name, some smiling softly as we passed. I noticed how easily she belonged here, how natural it was for her to exist among people who'd learned to live with pain. When we reached the room, she stopped by the door. "You should listen alone," she whispered. I looked at her, uncertain. She smiled that quiet, knowing smile that had always felt like home. And then she left, closing the door gently behind her. The tape player sat on the nightstand, old and dusty. I placed the cassette in pressed play, and for a moment there was only static. Then his voice. "John," it began rough and low. "I didn't think you'd ever hear this. I don't blame you. You were right to hate me." I froze. It was like hearing a ghost that had been waiting inside me all along. I didn't know how to love without control. The voice continued. "I thought protection meant power, and I hurt you for it. You became the man I wanted to be, not the man I taught you to be. For that I'm proud and ashamed." The room blurred around me. His voice broke mid-sentence, then steadied. "If you're hearing this, I guess you came back. I hope it wasn't too late." The tape clicked softly, as if it too had run out of words. I sat there for a long time, staring at the player. Then slowly, I reached out and pressed rewind. I needed to hear it again, not to understand, but to remember that forgiveness sometimes sounds like a voice fading through static. When I finally stepped outside, Emma was waiting in the hallway, eyes red but smiling. I didn't say anything. I just reached for her hand. And for the first time, I didn't pull away. We didn't speak during the drive home. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was tender, almost fragile, like a space that didn't need filling. Emma's hand rested on the window frame, her wedding ring catching the morning light. The cassette lay on the dashboard between us, quiet, but alive, like a small heart that had learned how to beat again. Halfway down the highway, she turned to me. "Did he say what you needed to hear?" I kept my eyes on the road. "He said what I should have listened to years ago." She nodded, waiting. "He said he was proud," I whispered, "and ashamed at the same time." Emma didn't reply. She didn't need to. The sound of the tires on the asphalt filled the space between us, a rhythm steady enough to hold 1,000 unsaid things. When we got home, the house felt different. Not lighter, not happier, just quieter, like it had been holding its breath all this time and could finally exhale. I placed the letter on the table beside the tape. "You should read it," I said. "I already did," she answered gently. "Years ago." I looked at her, half surprised, half knowing. "You always see ahead of me, no?" She smiled. Faintly. "I just stand where you refuse to look." She walked into the kitchen, started making tea. I stood by the window watching her move, calm, deliberate, as if every motion carried meaning. And I realized this was her way of healing things. Not by speaking about them, but by making room for them to breathe. After a while, she said, "You don't have to go back there again, you know." But I did. I just didn't know why yet. That night when she fell asleep beside me, I couldn't close my eyes. I kept hearing his voice those last few seconds of the tape where the static almost drowned him out. There was something faint at the end, something I hadn't noticed before. A whisper buried beneath the hiss. I slipped out of bed, went to the living room, and played it again. This time, I turned the volume up, pressing my ear close. Between the fading breaths and the static, I heard it. The lockbox. Under the bench. I froze. The bench. The same one beneath the old oak, where I had read his letter. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the strange gravity of unfinished things. At dawn, I left a note for Emma and drove back. The road felt shorter this time, like the distance between past and present had finally begun to close. The hospice was quiet when I arrived. A nurse I hadn't seen before greeted me, recognizing the name from the donation list. She led me through the courtyard back to the oak bench. The air was cool, the light soft and forgiving. I knelt down beside the bench, brushing away a layer of fallen leaves. There, beneath the slats of wood, was a small metal box, rusted but real. My hands shook as I lifted it out. It was heavier than I expected. The latch resisted for a moment before snapping open with a dull click. Inside was a stack of folded papers, a pocket watch identical to mine, but this one had a broken chain and an old photograph of my father holding me as a boy. On top of the papers lay another envelope, sealed and marked with my name again. But this time beneath it, he had written one more word: truth. I sat down slowly, the bench creaking beneath me, and opened it. John, if you found this, it means you came for answers, not forgiveness. I never told you the whole story. The money I used to build this hospice wasn't mine. It was meant for your mother's treatment. She told me to use it for something good when she knew she wouldn't make it. I couldn't forgive myself for obeying her. My breath caught. I read the lines again, but they didn't change. I built the hospice because she wanted it. Every wall carries her name, even if no one sees it. You blamed me for leaving her to die, but she chose to go that way, John. She wanted to leave something behind that wouldn't rot in bitterness like I did. The world tilted slightly. I pressed the paper to my chest, my heart pounding so hard I thought the air might split. You swore you'd never come back here because of me. But it wasn't me you were running from. It was her. The memory of a love too pure to understand while you were angry. The only way to honor her is to keep this place alive. Let it be hers. Let it be yours. Let it be peace. By the time I finished, my vision blurred again, but not from grief, from clarity. All those years, every time I cursed my father for choosing strangers over his family, for building a hospice instead of saving her, I was cursing a man who was only doing what she asked. Emma had known. Somehow, she had known all along. I folded the letter, placed it back inside, and held the watch in my hand. The glass was cracked, The minute hand stuck at 7:19, the time of her death. I remembered that night, the way my father had stood at the door, hands shaking, waiting for me to come in. I never did. Now I understood why he couldn't look at me after. Why he built walls and filled them with dying people. Why he kept her alive through others. When I rolled up, the courtyard was empty, but the wind had shifted. The trees swayed. The sunlight broke through in thin, golden lines. For the first time, the hospice didn't feel like a place of death. It felt like a continuation. I whispered, "I see it now." And in the stillness that followed, I swore I could hear two voices, his and hers, woven into the morning air, not saying goodbye, just saying you can go home now. When I returned home, Emma was sitting on the porch steps barefoot, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. She didn't look surprised to see me. She just lifted her head and said softly, "You found it, didn't you?" I didn't answer right away. I stood there for a moment, the morning sun warming my shoulders, the letter still folded inside my coat pocket. There was no need to ask how she knew. She always knew, not from logic, but from love that could sense the weight of something unseen. "I found her," I finally said. Emma's eyes softened. "Your mother?" I nodded. In his words. In the truth I refused to see. I sat beside her. The porch boards creaked under our weight, the old familiar sound that had always felt like home. She waited as I spoke, not interrupting, not asking for details, just listening, like she'd been listening for years. I told her about the letter, the lockbox, the confession, and the truth about my mother's final wish. When I finished, she didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't even speak for a long time. Then she whispered, "So she asked him to build the hospice?" "Yes," I said. She wanted to leave something behind that would outlast her pain. I thought he was trying to erase her, but he was keeping her alive, just not the way I understood. Emma's fingers tightened around the mug. She must have known he couldn't save her, so she gave him something else to save. I looked at her. "You sound like you knew her." Emma smiled faintly. "Maybe I do. Women who love men like you, they always carry the same kind of mercy." Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't look away. "You've been trying to punish yourself for being human, John, but guilt isn't loyalty. It's just another form of running away." I turned toward her. "You think I've been running? I think you've been living half a life," she said quietly. "Half here, half trapped in the moment you walked it out of that hospital years ago." Her words cut through me, not sharply, but with precision, like someone setting a bone that had healed wrong. "Emma," I said after a long silence, "why didn't you tell me sooner? About the hospice, about the letters, about the donation, all of it." She looked down at her hands, "Because forgiveness can't be forced into light. It has to find its own hour. I knew if I pushed too early, you'd only hate me for trying." And now she met my eyes. Now you're finally ready to love without the weight of who you were. The air grew still. I didn't know whether to cry or laugh or just sit there forever. Instead, I took her hand, the one that had held so many unspoken prayers, and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." She smiled gently. "You make it sound like I had a choice." We sat there until the tea went cold. A quiet peace settled between us. Not joy, not relief, but something steadier. Something like acceptance. Later that evening, after she'd gone to bed, I walked into my study. The walls were lined with photographs, moments from a life built on stubborn endurance. But for the first time, they felt incomplete. I took out my father's letter, unfolded it carefully, and placed it beside my mother's old photograph, the one I'd kept hidden for decades. I hadn't looked at it since the funeral. Her eyes were bright, her smile patient, as if she'd been waiting all this time for me to catch up to the truth she already knew. I whispered to the photo, "I blamed him for following your wish. I blamed you for leaving. But I see it now. Both of you were trying to save me in your own way." The words felt like a release. Not dramatic or divine, just quiet and real. I lit a small candle by the photo. Its flame flickered against the glass, bending light into something softer, warmer. For a moment I thought I saw both their reflections, hers, gentle, his resolute, merging in the faint glow. And then I heard the front door creak open. Emma appeared wrapped in a blanket, her hair tousled from sleep. "You're still awake," she said, voice husky. "I was talking to them," I replied, "or maybe just to myself." She smiled, walking closer. "You don't have to do it alone anymore." I looked at her, really looked, and realized how much she'd carried the years of distance of watching me vanish into my own silence. And still she stayed. "Emma," I said quietly, "you gave away nearly everything we had." I know she said simply, but maybe now we can start again without the weight of what was never ours to keep. I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You think peace can come after all that?" She nodded slowly. "Peace doesn't come after. It comes when you finally stop trying to rewrite what's already written." Her words settled deep, echoing my father's voice from the tape. "You can't heal what you keep hiding from." I turned back to the candle, its flame steady now. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man haunted by ghosts. I felt like a man being forgiven by the living. Emma slipped her hand into mine. "Come to bed," she whispered. We stood there for a while, watching the candle burn, a quiet tribute to everything lost and everything found. Then as we walked down the hallway together, I realized something simple but profound: forgiveness doesn't erase history. It redeems it. And for the first time, the house didn't feel haunted by the past. It felt blessed by it. The following morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was still the kind of silence that hums softly when peace has finally made itself at home. Emma was asleep beside me, her breathing slow and even. For a while I just watched her, the way the early light traces her face, the faint lines around her eyes, the quiet endurance written in every gesture. I realized I'd never truly seen her until now. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and walked to the study. The candle had burned out, leaving only a pool of wax beside my parents' photo. The air still carried that faint scent of smoke and something sacred. The cassette lay on the table next to the letter. I pressed play again, half afraid the voice would sound different in daylight, but it didn't. My father's voice was still rough, fragile, too human to hate anymore. "John, if you're hearing this, I hope you found peace where I couldn't. Don't let silence become your inheritance." That line lingered. Don't let silence become your inheritance. It wasn't just a warning, it was a command. I turned off the player and stood there, the words echoing in my head. For so long, I had let silence define everything: my marriage, my fatherhood, my faith. I had mistaken stillness for strength. But silence had only ever been fear, wearing dignity's mask. When I walked into the kitchen, I saw a note taped to the fridge in Emma's handwriting. "They're hosting a remembrance service at the hospice today. Noon. I think you should go." I smiled faintly. Even when she wasn't awake, she found a way to speak to the part of me that still hesitated. By 11, I was back on the road. The same winding path, the same gray hills, but this time the drive felt different. The world outside didn't seem to be closing in anymore. It was opening. When I arrived, the courtyard was filled with people. Families of patients, nurses, volunteers. Some faces carried the ache of loss, others the fragile light of gratitude. There was a small stage set near the fountain, and behind it, a bronze plaque glimmered in the sun. I stepped closer. The inscription caught me off guard. "In loving memory of Margaret Miller, who taught us that even goodbyes can heal." My mother's name. For a moment, my legs went weak. I reached out, tracing the letters with my fingertips. The metal was warm from the sun, but my hands trembled. I hadn't expected to see her name here, not like this. She wanted people to remember her. A voice said softly beside me. I turned. It was the same nurse, older now, but still with that calm light in her eyes. "She told your father to make sure her name lived somewhere that would never stop helping people." She continued. "He said this place would be her voice when his was gone." I swallowed hard, and he kept that promise. The nurse nodded. he did. Until the end, he believed you'd come to see it. I looked around the courtyard. Children were helping plant small white flowers in the soil. Nurses tied ribbons on the fence, each one with a name written on it, the names of those who had gone but were never forgotten. The nurse handed me a ribbon and a pen. "Would you like to write one?" I stared at the blank space pen hovering. Then I wrote, "For Margaret and David Miller, you taught me how to stay when it hurts." When I tied it to the fence, the ribbon fluttered softly in the wind, gold against the gray. The ceremony began. A young woman stepped onto the small stage, reading letters from families who'd lost loved ones here. Stories of pain turned into gratitude, endings turned into beginnings. And as she spoke, I realized that was the same current that ran through my parents' lives, through mine, through Emma's. The slow alchemy of suffering into grace. When it was over, I stayed behind while the crowd dispersed. The nurse approached again, holding something wrapped in a linen cloth. "He left this in the office years ago," she said. "He said it was meant for you, once the time was right." Inside the cloth was a journal, my father's. The leather was worn, the pages yellowed. On the first page he had written, in thick black ink, "If you can't talk to me, talk here. I'll still hear you." The rest of the pages were filled with his handwriting entries, written after my mother's death. Thoughts, regrets, even the mundane details of the hospice being built. But near the end, one line stopped me cold. "I keep building rooms for people to die in, hoping one day my son will find the room he was meant to live in." I closed the journal, holding it against my chest. That was the kind of love I'd refused to understand, the kind that doesn't ask to be seen, only to be completed. When I left, I didn't feel the same man who had walked into that place the first time. I felt like a man who finally understood what legacy meant. Not money, not monuments, but mercy. Before driving away, I looked back at the hospice one last time. The building glowed in the afternoon light, the bronze plaque shining like a quiet heartbeat. I whispered to the air, "You did it, Dad. You both did." And somewhere in that golden silence, I felt it again, not a reply, but a presence. The kind that doesn't need words to say, "We're proud of you too." That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the study, with the journal open in front of me, reading every word until the pages began to blur. My father had written in a rhythm that felt like breath, steady, uncertain, human. The last entry was dated the day before he died. I see him in every son who walks his father's steps, with anger in his chest. Maybe that's the curse of love. It always wants to be understood, even when it hurts. If he ever comes back, tell him I didn't die waiting for forgiveness. I died hoping he'd forgive himself. The words burned through me. I closed the journal and pressed it against my heart, my breath uneven. For years, I'd imagined his final thoughts were about me turning away, but he'd been praying that I'd stop carrying the very burden I thought he gave me. Emma found me there in the dark hours later. She stood by the doorway, her voice soft. "You read it all." I nodded. Every line, and I think I finally understand what he was building. It wasn't a hospice. She tilted her head. Then what was it? A sanctuary, I said. Not for the dying, for the people left behind. She walked closer and sat beside me. "And what about you, John? Are you done being left behind?" I looked at her face half lit by the lamplight, and realized something I hadn't been ready to see before. She wasn't just my witness through all this. She was my redeemer. I took her hand and placed the journal between us. He spent his life trying to build peace. You spent yours trying to make me walk into it. I think I've been the only one refusing to live in it. Emma soothed faintly. Peace isn't a place, John. It's the moment you stop fighting the people who tried to love you. Her words settled in the room like a soft weight. The kind that doesn't crush, it grounds. I reached for the cassette again, turned it over, and noticed something I hadn't before: a small handwritten note taped to the back. It was faint, almost erased with time, but I could still make out the words, "Play this at the hospice by the fountain." I looked up at her. He left something else. She nodded gently. "Then you know what you have to do." The next day I went back one more time. The hospice staff recognized me now. They didn't ask questions when I walked past the reception. The courtyard was empty, the morning light soft against the brick. The fountain's water shimmered, reflecting the sky. I set the old cassette player on the bench, pressed play, and waited. The tape hissed a sound that somehow felt alive. And then came his voice. But it wasn't just him. It was my mother, too. Her voice was faint, trembling with age and love. "David, it's recording. Are you sure you want to?" "Yes," my father interrupted gently. "For him. Then say it," she whispered. He took a shaky breath. "John, we never learned how to love without fear. We taught you how to be strong, but not how to be soft. I hope when you hear this, you'll know that silence was never our punishment for you. It was our way of holding on when words kept failing." Then her voice came through again, quiet but clear. "You were our better version, John. You were what we wished we had been brave enough to be." The fountain murmured in the background like it was keeping time with the past. I sat there frozen, my throat closing around 1,000 things I wanted to say, but couldn't. The recording went on the sound of them breathing, faint laughter, then a pause before the final line. "If you're here, it means you forgave us. So now let go." The tape ended with a click of finality. I didn't move. I couldn't. The world around me, blurred water, sunlight, air, all blending into a kind of holiness I couldn't explain. Then slowly, I stood and walked toward the fountain. The water rippled golden in the morning light. I took the cassette, the letter, and my father's broken watch and placed them on the stone edge. "This was never about the money," I whispered. "It was about what you were trying to buy me time." The watch's hands were still frozen at 7:19. I looked at it one last time, then let it slip into the water. It sank slowly, the ripples expanding outward in perfect circles. And with it went everything I'd been holding: anger, guilt, silence, pride. I stayed until the ripples faded. Then I turned toward the horizon, the sunlight hitting my face. Behind me, the fountain kept running steady, alive. I closed my eyes and heard both their voices. In the wind, my father's steady, my mother's tender, overlapping like harmony after years of discord. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt answered. When I walked away, I didn't look back. Because what was behind me wasn't unfinished anymore, it was complete. That was the moment I knew what forgiveness really was. It wasn't a choice. It was a return. When I came home that evening, the house felt lighter, not because anything had changed, but because something had finally been released. The air didn't carry that silent tension anymore, that invisible weight that had haunted every corner for years. I could feel it the moment I stepped through the door. Emma was in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the rug, sorting through a box of old photographs. She looked up when she heard me. "You went back," she said softly, not as a question. I nodded. I did. She studied my face for a moment, as if searching for something she'd been waiting to see. Then she smiled faintly. "And I let him go," I said, "both of them." Her eyes filled with quiet relief. She didn't rush toward me, didn't make it dramatic. She simply closed the box, set it aside, and whispered, "Then come sit." I joined her on the floor. She handed me a stack of photographs. Most were faded birthdays, trips, small pieces of a life we'd been too busy or too broken to remember. I smiled at one where she was laughing in the snow, holding a younger version of me by the arm. My hair was darker than my eyes, less guarded. She traced the photo with her fingertip. "That was the year we almost divorced," she said. I laughed quietly. "You remember that year fondly?" "I remember that we stayed," she said. "And that's worth remembering." The simplicity of her answer struck something deep. Staying. That's what she had always done through the silence, through the years of watching me fold in on myself. She never left, even when I gave her every reason to. "Emma," I said slowly, "when you donated that money, did you ever think I'd hate you for it?" She didn't hesitate. "I knew you would. But I also knew hate can't survive where truth eventually stands." I looked at her, searching her face for any trace of doubt, but there was none. Only that quiet conviction that had always scared and saved me in equal measure. She reached into the box and pulled out a photograph I'd never seen before. My father standing beside the hospice fountain, younger, but still with the same weary gentleness in his eyes. My mother was beside him, sitting on the bench, sunlight on her face. He took this a few weeks before she passed, Emma said. The nurse gave it to me after the donation. The image blurred in my hands as tears pressed against my eyes. They look happy. They were, Emma said, because they had already forgiven each other. They didn't need to win anymore. Her words hung in the air, soft and steady. That was it, the thread that connected everything. My father's hospice, my mother's wish, Emma's act, my silence. None of it had been about winning. It had always been about surrender, the kind that doesn't mean defeat, but acceptance. I leaned back against the couch, exhaling slowly. Do you think they'd forgive me? She smiled, touching my arm. John, forgiveness doesn't travel one way. It meets you halfway the moment you start walking toward it. The clock ticked quietly in the background. Somewhere outside, the streetlights hummed to life. I felt the evening fold itself around us like a slow exhale. I told her everything about the tape. The last recording, my mother's voice, the watch in the fountain. She listened in stillness, her eyes glistening, her hand never leaving mine. When I finished, she said, so that's where the story ends. I shook my head. No, that's where it begins. I walked to my desk and picked up the journal. He left this for me, I said. But I think it isn't just for me anymore. Emma tilted her head. What do you mean? I'm going to rebuild part of the hospice, I said. Use what's left of the money, and more if I have to, but not as a place for the dying this time. For the living people who've lost people who can't forgive people like me. She blinked, surprised, but smiling through tears. You want to carry it forward? I nodded, not out of guilt, out of gratitude. For a long moment she just looked at me, that look of wordless pride that only comes when someone finally becomes who they were always meant to be. He'd be proud of you, she whispered. I shook my head. He'd say it's about time. We laughed softly, but it was laughter. Real, alive, almost healing in its simplicity. Then Emma leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder. You know, she murmured, you never told me what the fountain sounded like. I smiled, like two people learning how to say goodbye without losing each other. She closed her eyes. That sounds like peace. It does, I said. And for once, I didn't have to run to find it. The room dimmed as night settled over the house. The candlelight flickered once more against the photo of my parents. And for the first time, the four of us, the dead, the living, the broken, the mended, all felt like part of the same quiet truth. Love doesn't end. It just changes shape until we're ready to recognize it again. Emma whispered, You're going back there again, aren't you? I smiled faintly. Yes. But not to visit to begin. She nodded against my shoulder. Then go. And this time, don't leave anything behind. Outside, the wind stirred gently through the open window, carrying the faint echo of running water. The sound of the fountain, or maybe just memory reminding me that some voices never die. They just learn to speak through silence. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to listen. A week later, I returned to the hospice one last time. Not as a son seeking forgiveness, not as a man chasing ghosts, but as someone who finally understood what all of it had meant. The courtyard was quieter than before. The flowers the children had planted were blooming now, white and gold bending gently in the breeze. The fountain still murmured softly, catching sunlight in its ripples, like pieces of a broken past being made whole again. I carried the journal under my arm, the same one that had once been my father's confession, and now felt like my inheritance, not of guilt, but of grace. The head nurse met me at the gate, smiling when she saw me. "You came back," she said. "I promised I would," I replied. She led me to her office, where plans for a new wing were pinned to the wall. "We've been struggling to finish the community room," she said. "The donation helped keep the hospice running, but the expansion was left on hold." I looked at the drawings, a simple open space with wide windows and soft chairs meant for families to rest, for conversations that never find words. "Let me finish it," I said quietly. The nurse blinked. Yes. With my wife. We'll fund it. But I don't want it to be named after me or even after my parents. She tilted her head. "Then what will you call it?" I looked out the window, where the fountain glistened under the morning light. "The Room of Silence," I said. "Not the kind that isolates, the kind that heals." She nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. "Your father would have liked that." "No," I said softly. "He built this place so I could like it." For the rest of that day, I walked the halls. Each room told a story. Faces on the walls, small notes pinned beside beds, traces of the living and the gone. But instead of heaviness, I felt warmth, the kind that comes when sorrow stops asking for attention and starts offering understanding. In the courtyard near the fountain, I placed my father's journal inside a glass display case, just one page open, the final entry visible. Peace isn't what comes after forgiveness. It's what appears when you stop running from it. Below it, a small plaque read, "Donated in honor of every silence that once carried love." When I stepped back, the wind picked up, rustling the pages gently, as if turning them for me. I smiled. Later that evening, Emma arrived. She stood beside me, her eyes taking in the courtyard, the light, the fountain. "So, this is what you've been building?" she said softly. I nodded. I thought I was finishing his story. "But I think I'm just beginning ours." She slipped her hand into mine. "Then let's keep writing." We sat on the same bench where I'd once opened. That letter, the same spot where I'd buried my guilt, my anger, my father's watch. The sound of water filled the air calm and constant. I used to think forgiveness was a word people said to make pain sound poetic, I said. But it's not. It's work. It's the slow rebuilding of everything we broke, starting with ourselves. Emma smiled. And sometimes it takes more than one lifetime. Maybe, I said. But we have this one. The sun dipped lower, and the sky turned the color of old gold, that warm, stoic light that feels like time slowing down. For a moment, I imagined my parents there too, not as memories, but as presence. My father standing quietly, my mother seated with her calm smile, both of them finally at peace. I turned to Emma. Do you remember what you wrote on that first note? She thought for a second, then nodded. Go back, before it's gone. I smiled. You were right. I usually am, she said, laughing softly. We stayed there until the lights of the hospice came on one by one, glowing like small promises against the dusk. Nurses walked by with gentle smiles. Patients' laughter drifted faintly through the halls. And for the first time, I realized the sound didn't hurt anymore. It healed. Before leaving, I took one last look at the fountain. The ripples caught the reflection of the moon, turning it into 1,000 shifting fragments. I whispered quietly. I kept my promise. I came back. The water shimmered as if answering. Emma squeezed my hand. You ready to go home? I looked at her, the woman who'd carried me through the storm, who'd believed in redemption when I didn't. Home isn't where we live anymore, I said. It's where we forgive. We walked out of the courtyard hand in hand. Behind us, the hospice glowed softly in the distance, a place once built by regret, now reborn in peace. As the gate closed behind us, I felt something lift inside me, like the last breath of a burden finally exhaled. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. And in that fullness, I heard them again, faint, distant, but unmistakable. My father's voice, my mother's laughter, merging into one quiet truth that had taken me a lifetime to learn, that love never dies. It just waits for us to become quiet enough to hear it again. So I listened, and in that silence, I finally lived.